Thank you all so very much for the warm introduction and the fantastic session that I had earlier this evening to learn about all the work that's being done here. I am just delighted to be here at this annual conference for the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation. In general, I've been a long-term admirer of this larger experiment going on in Canada to figure out how to use official development assistance resources to support grassroots organizations, be they in Canada and then in partnership elsewhere in the world. You all are living and actively helping others in Alberta live the truth that all lives have equal value. And boy, did we see amazing examples of that in the work that you are doing out here, whether that's in health or education or reducing gender-based violence. I think what I'd propose for us is that we come together tonight to reflect on how we advance these goals in the current moment, sort of grounding our work in where we find ourselves more generally, internationally, geopolitically. This is a moment in which those of us who work in this sector have both an opportunity and a really serious obligation. We have to build back the development ambition and progress that's been lost, or at best put on pause by the pandemic. And we really don't have time for either unrealistic ambitions in this era of what our public budgets look like, but we also don't have time or patience for small ball tactics. This is both because of and despite those same demands on our public resources in the global north. I was really excited to be the first CEO of the Global Innovation Fund because 7 years ago, I thought that innovation was really critical for international development. There's a Harvard economist called Danny Roderick who describes international development, or development for any country, as a journey of self-discovery. What are we good at? What could we get better at? What should we stop doing? And so by definition, that self-discovery has in it experimentation, testing, learning. Well, those are all words that are synonyms in some ways for innovation. So it's got to be a good use of our scarce philanthropic, our scarce aid resources to put it back and to put our shoulder against innovation. That's what I reasoned when I was approached about this job. And I had also, I think, been in a process myself, having worked in the space of evidence generation, being part of this sort of randomista movement, that my thinking had evolved to a little bit to say that, look, the best evidence doesn't tell us what works, and then we sort of scale that up mechanistically. It helps us to update our priors, rule certain things out, choose where to work and how to work, just as much as what to do. And so I was like, yes, the Global Innovation Fund, what a fantastic experiment itself in how we do modern foreign assistance. Okay, so fast forward to today. I've been working on this for 7 years, and there's some important lessons that we've learned, and understanding where you guys are as well in your journey of working on innovation and development. I hope some of this proves useful for you. So I thought I would reflect tonight on the importance of embracing innovative financing in tackling major development challenges, the value of bringing governments together to pool their resources and share risk in pursuit of social value. I'll talk about the importance, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir with this crowd, about how we should be working with local entrepreneurs, with them in the driver's seat, to design, test, and scale innovations with the potential to improve the lives of the world's poorest people. But first, let me come back to this idea of development as self-discovery and development assistance. First, let me signpost here that innovation in development pays. Of course, all of us can name headline examples of that, whether it's the expansion of mobile money, the Green Revolution, the COVID-19 vaccines. But beyond those headline shiny ideas, there's also a base of hard quantitative evidence that says this pays off. The Development Innovation Ventures at USAID says they've generated $17 for every dollar that they've invested. At GIF, we've calculated that just 6 of our early investments have generated something like $500 million in social value. That's compared to a total of $100 million deployed in total over 7 years. But despite this being the case, spending on innovation for international development is low. According to the OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, concessional finance to science, technology, and innovation represents something like 6% of total concessional finance by members, multilaterals, and other countries. In general, we put too few resources behind innovation, I will argue to you tonight, and we continue to struggle to follow on fund where innovations seem most promising. We can do better. I want to first tell you a bit about our partnership between GIF and Global Affairs Canada. I think it epitomizes some of these best things that we could be doing more of, and I think it'll be useful in terms of reflecting on how do we learn about what really works in innovation for development. So I don't have to tell this room full of people that the case for addressing gender inequality, both as a means to an end and as an end in and of itself, is important for development. Globally, women are more likely to be unemployed than men, overrepresented in informal and vulnerable employment, paid less than men are for the same work, and do disproportionate amounts of unpaid care and domestic work. 12 million girls every year are married before they're 18. The burden of depression and mental illness falls disproportionately on women and girls. Now, the way I like to think about this is that, all people should be protagonists in their own story. But the reality is that for far too many women and girls, for both implicit and explicit reasons, find that, that simple claim is really a far cry. And that's why, in part, it's so powerful that Canada is leading the way globally on this gender equality agenda through its feminist international assistance policy. And in 2017, we approached our friends at GAC about the possibility of working together to harness GIF's evidence-based approach in finding and funding innovation with the aspiration of transformational impact for equality that GAC had sort of taken on for themselves. And in 2018, we were delighted to launch the Innovating for Gender Equality Fund in partnership with GAC. Our goal here is to make scalable investments that empower women and girls. But I think the fund is also exciting because we're not just saying we're going to create good new jobs for women, or we're going to fund public service delivery that benefits women and girls, but we're going to seek out innovations that explicitly target larger social norms that are the underpinnings for gender inequality. Let me give you an example. In 2018, we deployed GAC funding to Strong Minds, a social enterprise that seeks to tackle depression among low-income women and girls in Southern Africa. They use facilitator-led and peer-led courses of group interpersonal therapy. This directly helps vulnerable people. But women supporting each other to offer more hope and less helplessness can have ripple effects to the real economy too. In 2019, Strong Minds reached over 23,000 patients, and we think that in 10 years' time, they'll have reached at least 200,000. During COVID, you can imagine Strong Minds' model was really rocked, and they quickly pivoted to a quite interesting facilitator-led group teletherapy model. What I like a lot, too, about Strong Minds is that they've agreed to subject their work to a rigorous randomized controlled trial, just like you would with any other new medical intervention. That evaluation's underway and will be used to inform further funding decisions. But one of the most important ways to keep focused on impact is to partner with local entrepreneurs and innovators. That's what I've heard in this room that all of you are doing under this model with your partnership with GAC as well. The people with deep personal understanding of the development challenges that they are trying to solve are the people we need to be listening to. If we limit ourselves, and now I'll talk to the other funders in the room, if we limit ourselves to funding founders who look like us, we run the risk of funding innovation simply for its own sake. So let me give another example from our gender portfolio that illustrates this point. In 2021, we awarded a grant to the education nonprofit in India called Breakthrough to scale their innovation, the TKT program, to reach 1.4 million adolescents. TKT is a locally designed curriculum delivered in government schools and designed to shift pervasive discrimination against women and girls, with the goal really of empowering adolescents to question gender norms. Breakthrough works with boys and girls to address preconceived ideas about gender. And in this case, we're building on the back of a previous rigorous randomized controlled trial that demonstrated in the state of Haryana that this program really is effective in changing gender attitudes amongst both girls and boys in a persistent way. This partnership's a good example of, I think, some of the ways that when we work as our best selves and how we collectively can think about gender transformative investing. Start from the position of learning from and with the innovator, rather than overly managing the design of the program or worrying about the activities that you're going to be paying for. Our work is focused on helping Breakthrough towards scale by backing them to generate lessons and to generate the data that they need for their own decision making and for their government partners. The government schools are an integral platform for the scaling strategy. There's no way you could reach 1.4 million kids without engaging deeply with government schools as a platform. I'd be interested in the Q&A to hear what others in the room think. But to my mind, in this gender space, I think impact evaluations are particularly important because the theories of change are complex and can be surprising. And what we learn can actually help us figure out the politics of scaling up things that could sometimes be a little bit controversial. You know, we are pushing against social norms in this space. When GIF supported a trial of radio-based messaging about modern contraception in Burkina Faso, the researchers' expectation going into the trial was that if the messaging was effective, you would see behavior change, which would lead to reduced fertility. Now, that could be somewhat controversial about how you message about scaling something like that up. In practice, this messaging did not lead to reduced fertility, but it did lead to better fertility management and associated changes in self-reported well-being and reductions in unsafe abortions. Well, the political calculus of scaling up such a program backed by that evidence is considerably less challenging than what might have been predicted going in. The evaluation helped us not just see what works, but how to talk about why and how and when and who in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do without investing in the evaluation. And you know, I think that's the core of the entrepreneur-led approach. At GIF, we don't spend a ton of time sitting in our office thinking deeply about a sector or a place and saying, what is our theory of change about them there? Instead, we really spend our time looking for entrepreneurs and their ideas and saying, how can we support generation of evidence of impact for this, for what you want to do, and for you to pivot your way to an interesting and resilient business model? This portfolio shows the power of our partnership in action. Innovation can support Canada's feminist international assistance policy, and it can help scarce resources go further. Over 500,000 people have benefited so far from our partnership, And this is going to grow to something like 12 million people over the next 10 years. Innovation pays. I told you that I thought that 7 years ago. What I think I would add that I've learned as a corollary is that humility pays. Those designing gender transformative innovations must have a deep understanding of the local context and culture. This is a place where opining too much from London or Ottawa or Edmonton or Washington, really just won't work. Our partnership with GAC demonstrated that embracing smart risk, underpinned by a commitment to rigorous measurement of social impact, can be a powerful tool. We can achieve outcomes that are meaningful for vulnerable people today and advance the larger policy priorities of governments. And we've actually taken this approach, and I really credit GAC with this, and said, can we turn this also to another great challenge of our day, which is climate change? In 2021, we finalized a climate strategy that has an investment focus built on resilience and adaptation. We really followed the model that we used in thinking about gender. What's the overlap between what GIF is good at and this space where we need some innovation? All of us know that the challenge of climate change requires both mitigation on the one hand and resilience and adaptation on the other. But disproportionately, funding is directed towards mitigation rather than resilience and adaptation. And that's really a space where we continue to struggle to figure out what's the best way to make scarce resources go further. So this led us to launch at COP26, our Innovating for Climate Resilience Fund, which is backed by our friends in the British government, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And here, let me tell you about one of the investments, because I want to talk a little bit about how we work in the private sector at GIF. We've made an investment in this company called AgriTask, which has a software platform that registers and maps small farms, gathers high-resolution weather data, and correlates it with plot-level productivity. This information helps big agricultural companies, think Starbucks, assess risks, design targeted insurance products, and provide agronomic advice to smaller farmers that they buy from. In turn, it enables those smallholder farmers to undertake more productive activities through the uptake of new technology. So far, I've been talking to you mostly about grants that GIF makes. This project with AgriTask isn't a grant. And the theme with the grant making that I've been pushing a little bit here is that we need rigorous testing to measure impact, that's critical to justifying funding for scaling. The second theme there was partnership with government, be it schools or mayors, that's critical for scale. Nonprofits can't and shouldn't go it alone. Innovation plus humility pays. But now when we enter into this space of supporting the private sector, the conversation or the thinking's a little bit different. Sometimes the funding challenge is more complex than this traditional grant making. Traditional aid agencies, and I'll speak of USAID and development finance institutions, may that be the USDFC or FinDev Canada here, have not always been good at taking the kind of risk that we're taking on when we back an early stage company like AgriTask. Early stage innovation ventures that scale through markets often face what was first called by the folks at the Omidyar Network to be a pioneer gap. Entrepreneurs behind innovative ventures may have been able to scrape together resources to understand the market need, develop a value proposition, some early proof of concept. But they need more funding to validate their ideas and translate their innovation potentially to scale. And the right flavor of money that they need is not necessarily a grant. This funding gap can really turn into a chasm for entrepreneurs who are trying to build the market that they're selling into, as opposed to competing on cost in an existing, well-understood market. Take that example of mobile money, when it was first introduced. Consumers needed to develop trust in a system that's entirely new to them. Maybe I'm dating myself, but I remember my uncertainty when the first time that I bought something online. That was me buying into a new market. And that's what's happening with entrepreneurs like AgriTask all over the world right now. If disruptive entrepreneurs do succeed in building the markets, of course they stand to benefit. Think of M-Pesa in Kenya. But building markets takes time and money, and it's risky. Commercial investors and banks may be skeptical. And while some markets in Canada or in the US and in India, perhaps there are deep pools of venture capital, in most developing countries that's just simply not the case. So along this capital returns continuum from aid and philanthropic grant money on one end to purely commercial capital on the other, we need to make better use of the development finance toolkit in this sometimes messy middle. Let me give you an example about creative blending capital across this returns continuum and taking smart risks to fund innovation that scales through markets. Let me tell you a little bit of this story of, this is an old investment now at GIF in a company called Babangona. When the founder of Babangona, Kola Masha, started this business, he had a vision not just of creating a profitable business, but also of improving the livelihoods of smallholder farmers in northern Nigeria. His vision was to create a scalable franchise-based model that provided end-to-end services to small farmers. So this means inputs for technical assistance, support in post-harvest storage, and helping to get crops to market for the best price at the best time, and then taking a cut of those profits to make the whole flywheel work. Kola understood the market and the farmers in it and the services that they were lacking. And if Babangona succeeds, it will reach hundreds of millions of farmers in northern Nigeria. This will improve their lives and also put just the smallest dent in the root causes of the long simmering conflict with Boko Haram. But to make all of that happen, Kola needed capital. And in particular, he needed capital that was early, flexible, and patient. And in practice, this is a story of navigating that capital returns continuum, of navigating that pioneer gap. So first, Babangona needed early stage capital. In this, a small foundation in the Bay Area gave the company some grants. The British mission, the High Commission in Nigeria, also provided them a grant. This was well before there was anything commercially viable in what Babangona was doing, but it helped them demonstrate that they could execute and that they could refine their business model. Second, Kola needed flexible capital. Babangona, which provides credit to farmers throughout the harvest season and harvest and planting season, has relatively large capital requirements. It's precisely this supply chain financing mechanism that makes it an interesting business model. But international commercial capital and even international development finance capital, like might come from a FinDev Canada or the USDFC, has to be dollar denominated. This taking on debt in dollars exposes Babangona to tremendous currency risk. This is where GIF entered the picture. We were impressed by Babangona's potential for social impact, the team and the business, and the potential to improve millions of people's lives. So what we did in collaboration with the company and with other potential lenders is that GIF made an investment in Babangona that was essentially local currency debt. And we agreed that we would be subordinate to the other lenders. That means that the first debt that Babangona would pay back would be their dollar-denominated debt to the senior lenders, and only then would they turn to repaying us at an agreed exchange rate that would reflect the fact that almost certainly their currency was devaluing. This significantly reduced the risk of the investment in Babangona for other investors. I'll come back to that in a sec. The final thing to remember and to think about is that Babangona needs patient capital. Some private equity funds, emerging market private equity funds, impact investing funds, are what is called closed-end funds, and they have a relatively short time horizon when they need to return capital to their investors and close that particular fund up. This can mean that high-impact investments get passed over because the VC or the PE fund can't convince themselves they'll have their returns in 5 years. Or once they are in, there's pressure to quickly exit, and that can come at a compromise to the social mission. GIF has an evergreen structure, and we don't have obligations to exit prematurely. So we can structure our loans to be patient, knowing full well that investing in fragile places like northern Nigeria requires time to allow the business to figure out how to get over inevitable bumps in the road and to build their market viability. Now, the loan from GIF is certainly concessional. It is certainly a subsidy in some sense. But the concessionality of the loan is well outweighed by the social impact that Babangona can generate. Because of the structure of the deal, other commercial rate investors were able to come on board with bigger pots of money at a more rapid rate than would otherwise be the case. And so both Babangona and their associated impact can come to scale sooner as a result of blending different kinds of capital together. We estimate that by entering into that subordinated debt tranche, we mobilized up to 10 times our investment in commercial capital. So that's a story about GIF taking some smart risk, taking deliberately a concessional position, exposing our capital to the potential for loss. Now, in that, there's, it certainly was potentially the case that we would not be repaid for that particular loan. And, we are backed by governments. The money that we are spending is taxpayer money, and it's a tremendous both honor and responsibility to be doing that. And we don't always think of governments as being good at taking risk. And that's often with very good reason. That taxpayer, those hard-earned dollars, or pounds, I guess, are a very precious resource. And yet, here we have this conundrum, if you think about Babangona. Innovation, leavened by humility, pays. So we have to bear some risk. It's the nature of the beast. So one way I think that GIF itself is an innovation is our solution to that challenge. We are independent, and we are multilateral. No single aid agency is shouldering all the risk when an investment or a grant is made. But all donors contribute meaningfully to the social impact generated and are able to point to the effectiveness of their aid dollars. We focus on, in our own reporting, the impact of our portfolio as a whole as well. I told you that highlight number about how well 6 of our early investments were doing. There's also at least 6 that completely failed as well. But at the portfolio level, you can think about, does $500 million of social value sound like a good bargain for $100 million deployed? I think that taken together, those two pieces of this model create a space for mission-aligned aid agencies to come together and pursue investments in innovations that might otherwise be hard to back just bilaterally. So let me conclude. When I think about the path forward for investors in impact, it's clear that not only is innovation important, but perhaps it's more important than ever before. And we should talk about this in our session following this. Yeah, it's inherently uncertain, investing in innovation. The upside's significant. It's incumbent on GIF as a funder of innovation, and you all in this room too, to share the proof points about what works and what doesn't in investing in this space. So I think it's so great to hear about deliberately how there are resources for this knowledge sharing and network building here in your community. I wish we should have a lot to learn from you ourselves. This is how we'll work collectively to continue to make the policy case for continuing to invest in new solutions. To be successful, innovation has to extend to every aspect of the operation, looking beyond symptoms to discover root causes, assembling innovative financing coalitions and creative funding strategies, and especially working with local entrepreneurs, being patient and being flexible. When we make grants, I really urge us collectively to work with and not around governments. They are not only a vital stakeholder, they're our best platform for scale. The innovators who are closest to the market failure are always our North Star about what we should be spending our time on. And so that's what we want to achieve at GIF. That's mostly through our partnership with GAC, but also with our wider backing for evidence-based innovation. I believe, and this is what I would leave us with, and we at GIF believe, to retreat from innovation and experimentation at this moment would be a mistake, leaving more people more poor and more insecure, and for longer. Funding evidence-based solutions to global challenges in the modern, post-pandemic international development will be critical for improving lives and livelihoods around the world. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to our conversation.